Why I'm talking about this, as those of you who know me know that I do not talk much about. Oh man, I'm seeing myself. Wonderful.
Cool.
I don't talk much about what I do at school, but since I started to talk, I'm talking about these things at school as well. And since I started to read about those things, there is something that makes me talk about them all the time. And I don't exactly know how to explain it, but there is a certain power that is not my power, not in a sense, a power that is beyond me that really makes me talk about those things. And I have a very good friend in Romania who is the granddaughter of someone who fought in the mountains as a partisan against communism. Ioana Hașu is her name. And I remember she told me once that whenever she was reading the testimonies of the people who stayed in prison during communism, when she was reading the testimonies, especially of her grandfather and the people who were with him. And he was always talking about, the testimonies were always about, they didn't care about the family who remained home so much. They weren't so concerned about that. They were not concerned about what may happen to them, but they were very concerned that the truth may be found out about them. And they were concerned that what is known about them is not true, and they wanted the truth to come out. And for some reason, I think that's another reason why it's really, I'm pushed all the time to talk about it. Not pushed, don't get me wrong. I feel the need to talk about it. Lena knows. When I taught a class, I think she only heard me talking about communist prisons and all this. So it's always a push that I feel that's really beyond me. And there's another reason for that, and that's why it's Birth Givers of Beauty. Because I thought that I wanted to present this before Nativity, during the Lent period before Nativity. And you will see that we'll talk about it because it feels to me that we are always called to do whatever happened in Nativity, and that is to give birth to beauty, to give birth to Christ in that sense. And I always fail miserably at doing so every day, and I thought I should do it. I should talk about it nevertheless. So I have this picture from the beginning, and the picture is, please stop me at any moment, okay? I know it's recording, but it's recording because I need to be recorded. Do not worry about it. Just stop me and ask me questions if you want. I have this picture because I want to have a piece of bread, mainly because bread is part of nourishment, and you'll see. I'll talk later about that. The fact that I didn't know about it, but I found out that Bethlehem in Hebrew means the house of bread, Beit Lehem. And I thought it was very interesting to have anything like that, because in Bethlehem, it's the bread that was born, the bread that becomes life. So, I have at the beginning two quotes, because both quotes I think are very important for what we're talking about. The first one comes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Many of you may be familiar with him. He was a Russian dissident, and he lived in he was a prisoner in Gulag, and he wrote about the Gulag, and he says something like this: "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart, and through all human hearts." And I wanted to have this quote because even if I will talk today about people who suffered and they are torturers, I do not talk about good people and bad people. Whenever I was reading about all those stories, one of the questions I always had for me was, what would I have done if I were in the 40s or in the 50s? Would I have been one of the torturers, or would I have been in prison? And the question itself doesn't make sense in some respect, in the sense in which it doesn't matter in one sense, but it matters in a different sense because it is the same question that happens every day in different ways, because I can do good or bad every day, and it's in me. That is, I have the potential to be evil, and I have the potential to be good. And in that sense, I will talk about today not about evil human beings and good human beings, but human beings that for each one of them there was this line between good and evil, and for some reason some went to one side and some to the other. At different times in their lives, actually, some of them went to both. So, And the other one that I think is important is what St. Isaac of Syria said about mercy and justice, and it's connected with what I said before. Mercy and justice in the same soul. It's like the men who worship the temple. Mercy is in contradiction with justice. Justice is the return of the equal because it returns to man that which he deserves. It does not bend to one side, neither is it partial in the retaliation. But mercy is sorrow that is moved by grace and bends to all with sympathy, and it does not return the harm to him who deserves it, although it overfills him, forgive me, who deserves good. And you know it's about suffering and forgiveness. And I thought I should have this quote because it says a lot about forgiveness, and that forgiveness itself never takes place in justice, but always takes place in mercy. Because in justice we always establish what some people deserve. I deserve the good, or I deserve the bad, because I did something. And it's nothing about what we deserve, or I won't present things about things that we deserve. Okay, so as the majority of you know, and probably all of you know, Romania is one of the Eastern countries left under communism after World War II. And I'm saying left under communism because there was a certain understanding between or among the high powers, so, the Eastern powers and the Western powers. And communists came into power in Romania not after elections, but they were, well, actually, yes, after elections, but falsified elections. I mentioned before this friend of mine, Iona Hașan, I saw once the kind of, cum se spune urna de vot? Urna. Ballot. I think ballot, yes. The kind of ballot they were doing, they had a normal ballot, and then they had two compartments. And one of the compartments was already full with the votes, and the upper level compartment was wherever you were putting the votes, and the votes were taken from the down level compartment. So they won 90-something%, if I remember correctly.
We need to get those for the States.
Probably, I don't get into that. So, but they were falsified elections, and obviously they were defended at the same time by the Russian army who occupied Romania at the moment. I'm not a historian, as the majority of you know, so I will, please help me if I have to say anything else. But I will talk a little bit about Marxist ideology and practice. And communism, as you all know, of course, has, I think at least, although some people may say that it's not, because Marxism is such a beautiful philosophy, and communism came this way because how badly we applied it. But I think it's really Marxist ideology at the base. It's not a different thing. And the problem with the Marxism, or some of the problems, because obviously there are many others, it's the class war. And this, for the way I see it at least, is that once you start from classes, you no longer talk about individuals or about persons, but rather group of citizens who become enemies. And in this context, there is a philosopher, Martin Buber is his name, who talks about I-it relationships and about I-thou relationships. And the main idea that he talks about in this, it's whenever we have an I-it relationship, we talk to human beings because of their features, or we talk to human beings considering their features or their attributes. If I can think of my wife as the one who does certain things because of her function as wife, then I think of her as an object. I consider her an object. I do not look at her as a person. If I talk to my wife in a different sense as to a person, one who is as infinite as I am, as equal to me as anyone else, and at the same time not only equal but also variable in the same way in which I am, then I consider her a person, if it doesn't make sense. But in communism, there is always an I-it relationship, especially because the people who were suffering during communism were suffering mainly because they were put into categories. You are, if you are a priest, for example, you are having problems because you talk about God, or, and in that sense you have some sort of freedom, or if you are, Țăran studied,
a wealthy peasant.
A wealthy peasant. You have properties, and again there are problems. Or intellectuals had problems as well because they had some sort of freedom. But all the time they were put into categories. They were not considered ever as human beings, but rather as individuals who belonged to a category, and those categories were always objectified, yes. And I want to say something else that I forgot, so it doesn't matter right now at least. Hannah Arendt, when she talks about the origin of totalitarianism, she talks about the fact that the Bolshevik regime created objective opponents, Bolshevik in the sense of the communists. I think Bolshev are the regents in Russia, right? The Bolshevik, whenever they constructed the communism, they had, I forgot how they are called, Bolshevik something, and that's where Bolshevik comes from.
Yeah, it started in 1980s, Bolshevik and Menshevik.
Yeah.
They fought each other, with like Red Russians, Bolsheviks, and White Russians were Menshevik.
And that's why
they fought each other.
Yeah, so the Bolshevik are the...
Bolshevik, yeah, it's a Russian 100%.
So they always created objective enemies. And I mentioned before, they could be intellectuals, priests, wealthy peasants, but they were always arrested, as Anna Applebaum says. She wrote a nice book about the Gulag. By the way, there are not so many books in English about them, but they come out now more and more. It's especially about the Russian Gulag, not so much about the other Gulags, the other Eastern countries, but clearly about the Russian Gulag. And she talks about the fact that people were arrested not for what they had done, but for who they were. So there was never a reason why you were put in prison. And I can give you, for example, a reason. You may have heard of Father Roman Braga, who is at the Michigan monastery, Dormition monastery, and he has terminal cancer. He's about to die, actually. But he spent time in communist prisons. He went to Pitești, as many of you know. Many of you know that Pitești was a horrible, one of the most horrible experiments that were done during communism. And he talks about the fact that he was in prison. He was a French teacher before he went to prison, and the party imposed to him to teach Marxism ideology, and he refused. French teacher. And that's why he went to prison. So, just for the reasons why you get the prison. That's just an example. I have a picture, and I know Adrian loves the region. I have a picture from the Bessarabia. Those are children from Bessarabia who were sent to Gulag. And I wanted to show you this picture because if you look at this picture, you think of human beings, of individuals, of nice children who have their own little craziness. And you have children, yeah. And their own actions as children, but they were always, in communism, you are not a child as a person, but you are always an object. They were a group, and being a group, they were the enemies of the people. By the way, there is a very nice movie, and I just saw it, I know Father saw it too, The Concert, and they talk a lot about the enemies of the people. I will mention it. So, I'll talk about beauty, right? So now I want to talk about ugliness. Any totalitarian regime, the way at least I see it, brings with itself separation and death. When we talk about categories, we create separation because we separate among categories. And in that sense, by bringing separations, I would say that it murders the beauty of the world, if I were to explain it. So, in a totalitarian regime, and I'm looking here because I forget what I'm talking, is essentially murderous mainly because it approaches individuals as members of a category, but never think of them as creatures who are redeemable. But they are unredeemable creatures because they have done something or because they belong to a category, and in that sense it murders their possibility of redemption. Father Calciu, Father George Calciu Dumitreasa, he talks about the fact that what communism did, it wanted to create a gap between generations. Why is that the case? Because the majority of people who were in prison in the late 40s and beginning of 50s were young intellectuals, people who were going to, not all of them, okay, I just told you they were peasants, intellectuals, priests, any kind of category that could become the enemy of the people, but many of them were young people who were going to school, to universities, and the main reason for that, from his perspective, is that communism wanted to bring a break or a gap between generations. In that sense, to bring ugliness. Because as long as you have to bring a break into the generation, then the values of the generation before are no longer transmitted to the other. So if you take young adults in their 20s and put them into prison, what you do, you disconnect them from their families. Disconnecting them from their families, you disconnect them from their values, you disconnect them from the church, you disconnect them from anything, and then you try to re-educate them. Because one of the method in communism was to re-educate people. And that's the Pitești experiment is about re-education. And I wanted to emphasize that mainly because if ugliness comes after separation, beauty, as I would say, comes actually in communion, and in that communion comes with me. Let me give you I will just read something from Richard Umbrand. He's very well known here. He is a Jewish pastor, actually. He was Jewish, and then he converted to Christianity. He was a Protestant pastor in Romania. And I mention him here mainly because he's probably one of the few published in English. We don't have so many things in English, right? But both him and Gafenko, Valeriu Gafenko, and I will talk about Gafenko in a moment, were at Târgu Ogna, and they were both very sick. They had pneumonia, both very close to death, and Valeriu Gafenko had aspirin, antibiotic, an antibiotic. Okay, so he gave it to him because he said he should survive, and Gafenko died. And he survived. But here's the testimony he had before the U.S. Senate, and I will just read it to give you an image of the ugliness that took place in the communist prison. One of the preferred method of torture was to crucify people. And there are other methods.
Drink some water.
I'm fine.
Oh, you sure?
Yes, thank you. The crosses were placed on the floor, and hundreds of prisoners had to fulfill their bodily necessities over the faces and bodies of the crucified ones. Then the crosses were erected again, and the communists jeered and mocked. Look at your Christ, how beautiful he is, what fragrance he brings from heaven. After being driven nearly insane with tortures, a priest was forced to consecrate human excrement and urine and give Holy Communion to Christians in this form. They suffered in the Romanian prison of Pitești. I asked the priest afterward why he did not prefer to die rather than participate in this mockery. He answered, "Do not judge me, please. I have suffered more than Christ. All the biblical descriptions of hell and the pains of Dante's Inferno are nothing in comparison with the tortures in communist prisons. This is only a very small part of what happened on one Sunday and on many other Sundays in the prisons of Pitești. Other things simply cannot be told. My heart would fail if I should tell them again and again. They are too terrible and obscene to put in writing. If I were to continue to tell all the horrors of communist tortures and all the self-sacrifices of Christians, I will never finish." And I really wanted to have this because of the ugliness of the things that took place in prisons. I know, for example, Father George Calciu says that we should never talk about those things. Not in the sense that we should not talk about communist torture or about what happened during communism. We should know the truth. But he says that the things that took place in Pitești, for example, and this is just a sample, really. I will say a few more things about Pitești in a moment, but the things that took place in Pitești are so horrible that whenever we talk about them, the only thing that we do is we bring more ugliness into the world. And in that sense, we should not even talk about them. I know Father Roman Braga says the same thing sometimes. It's almost incomprehensible to talk about them, and we cannot talk about such things because we are normal people, he says. We will never understand what happened in Pitești. And in Pitești, what happened was that young people, young students were, there were several in a cell, but young students were made to fight against another. A group, for example, and I will just give the short version. A group of students were re-educated, and what I mean by re-education was that they were forced to negate their own origin, to blaspheme against God, against their God, to say horrible things about their parents, about their mothers, about their sisters, things that I don't want to say right now. And after that, they were put in the same cell with a new group of students And then at a certain moment, out of nowhere, they were made to beat the first group up. So they were students against students. So you could no longer trust anyone. That was the main idea, because as long as you know that the one who is in prison with you is torturing you, then the whole sense of normality disappears. If you, as a priest, are forced to consecrate feces and urine as the body and blood of Christ, or you are made, actually, here I should not say, you are given the picture of your daughter, which things like that happen, and you are made to to say certain things and do certain things that you would, you understand me. So I'm not gonna. But why was all this done? All this done was because they wanted to break them. They wanted to break the human soul, so they are no longer persons, I would say, but they are individuals who are just doing things robotically. Father George Calciu was one of the people who became a torturer. Father George, I'm mentioning this because he is one who came back. I'm not mentioning this in order for Father George Calciu to be judged. Actually, Father George Calciu, he died 7 years ago, and some of you may have seen on the news that a few days ago he was
Unburied. He was unburied.
Unburied, yes, and they found his body intact.
They found his relics intact.
They found, but yeah, so
Really?
yeah, find online there's a shame. So I don't want to about things like that. I don't want to talk because I don't know anything about that. But what I'm trying to say is that Father George Calciu was one of the people who became a torturer himself, and precisely because he could. And I'm saying this just to realize the fact that. I mentioned at the beginning that the line between good and evil is in every human heart, and at times you do not know how you would react in the case of such evil that is in your heart. And then he came back, but he came back, and I will mention them one more. So, let me move to beauty. I'm taking too much time. How do we go from this to this? That's the... and I think that the call of beauty is a call of relationships. And relationships, even with the people that are torturing us. If communism brings ugliness into the world because it creates rupture and it creates break into relationship, it creates lack of communion, what the call that we have as human beings is the call of beauty, precisely because we are here to form relationships. But we can never realize beauty individually. Beauty is always realized in the relationship with another human being. And the relation in this relationship is not that you realize beauty within yourself, but you realize beauty within the other. Not with groups, relationships, but people among people. And I wanted to consider this in the sense of constellations. And what is the sense of constellation? If you think about the constellation, each star within a constellation has its own role. If a star on a constellation does not illumine, it is not that the star itself is no longer beautiful, but rather the sky itself loses in beauty. And if we consider ourselves as human beings as parts of constellations, different kinds of constellations, because we have a constellation at home with our family, a constellation at church with the people at church, a constellation at work, different kinds of constellations. If we consider ourselves as human beings who, in this relationship that we have with other people, form constellations, what we are actually doing, we are forming beauty in the world in the relationship itself. I will say more about it. So, forgiveness. Relationships, of course, beautiful teacher from Romania, of course. Relationships are not formed from my region, Făgăraș, just so you know. Are not formed in hatred, of course, and not even in the lack of forgiveness, because that presupposes an I in relationship. If I do not forgive someone, I do not forgive the other person, because the other person is this. If I do not forgive my wife, forgive me, Lena. but I have to give examples. I do not forgive her because she did this, and because she is this to me in this moment. And in that sense, if I do not forgive her, what I am doing, I'm murdering her. And I've done it several times. Forgive me. But I'm murdering her because she's no longer a person, she's an it. She's the one who did this to me. And I'm murdering not only her, and I'm murdering the beauty in her, but I'm murdering the beauty of the constellation that I may be able to create with her. And in that sense, forgiveness, I think forgiveness is something that brings beauty into the world. And it recreates the world in what it was said. I mentioned before, Father George Culture, look at him. Whenever I look at Father Culture, I'm always amazed. It's your beautiful face and a radiant face. And to think that such a human being went through Pitești. And after Pitești, he got married. And after Pitești, he had a child. Whenever I was reading about him, I have the book. Here it is. It's in English. Wonderful. My students read it. Whenever I read about him and about Pitești, it blows my mind because I do not know how a human being can love after Pitești. How a human being can have a family after Pitești. It just blows my mind.
Forgive us.
Forgive us, yes.
Yeah.
But it really blows my mind. And by the way, he went to the prison a second time. And the second time he went to prison, he wanted to go to prison. And he wanted to die in prison as a martyr, by the way, because he wanted to somehow, redeem himself, redeem for the things he did in prison the first time. And let me show you another beautiful human being, and that is Valeriu Gafencu, considered by many a martyr of the communist prison. And Greeks know that martyros means a witness, and one that gives testimony. But one that gives testimony as a martyr, not in the sense of talking about things, although he did talk in prison a lot, but testifying for his faith or testifying for beauty with his life. I mentioned before that he had an antibiotic, and then he gave it to Richard Wurmbrand, saying that he should be the one who survives. By the way, Richard was not Orthodox, he was another, so to say. He wasn't from the same confession and so on. But he always, there are so many, I will not be able to talk about everything about him, but I wanted to mention him here because Valeriu Gafencu, I think, is one of the beautiful human beings who spend time in prison. There are 3 more sessions, so I have time to talk about him more. So, I mentioned before about the constellations, and I really think that the remaking of lost connection is the making of the constellations, and in that sense, the making of the beauty in the world. And I will not say much more. I will show you a little video. I hope it works. And it's many of the people who survive prisons. Let me try. If it doesn't work, it's Father who put the internet, so forgive him.
Yeah, that's right. It's better. No, it should work.
It's a very
Îți scriu o carte, mamă, din Aiud, din tămnița cu lacăt și zăbrele, cu ziduri reci, din care nu se aud, cum mor în lanțuri visurile mele. Feciorul tău cu pieptul de aramă ce alerga adesea pe poteci, azi n-a rămas decât o umbră, mamă, în temnița cu zidurile reci. Îți scriu o carte poate e cea din urmă, căci dansul Salomei e viitor, căci până în zori o viață ia-ți curvă, că zi și noapte moare între noi. De acum nu vei găsi la noi nici milă, nici înțelegere. Luați-l și duceți la celulă. Și m-au dus în celulă.
Domnul toate pereții erau zugrăviți cu funingine. Nu cu var, ci cu funingine. Ca să fie mai sumbră, mai infernală închisoare. Flăcări nu erau. Flăcări însă îi spuneau de suferință.
Aici este o temniță grozavă, dar pentru tine nu e o temniță numai, este o parodie a ta.
Am avut una 12. Nu 2, 3, 50 de lovituri se schimbau, că transpirau. Mi-au sărit bucanci din picioare. Atunci au continuat pe pielea moartă.
Voi nu veți răcați, veți putrezi aici.
Da. Știți cum ați intrat aici? În chier la bă, în mormântul chierii.
Cine nu se mișcă, moare. Suntem aici ca să murim înghețați. Și atunci m-am întors spre episcop. Preferențite, iată voia Sfintei Providenței.
Și mi-au dat 12 ani în căsniță. Pentru că am compus psalmi și cântări religioase. Altă crimă n-am făcut.
Pentru răsturnarea comunismului primesc de la 15 ani până la moarte.
Să te omorâm cum ai vrea, matale, nu facem că te facem martir.
Da, unde e confuzie, unde este problema, cred că securitatea avea mulți anchetatori din partea preoților.
În harul acela nu se biserica săracă, bătrână, supusă unui stăpân pământean, lui Nicolae Ceaușescu.
Sursa cruzimii mereu este frică. Cine te chinuiește are o mare frică. E frică mai mult decât cel chinuit. Și trebuie să înțelegi situația aceasta. Pentru că dacă nu înțelegi, atunci și tu ai pierdut și chinuitorul a pierdut. este autentic cu omul care măcănuiește. Nu, nu.
Cu fiecare lovitură pe care mi-o dai, să înalță o rugăciune către Dumnezeu ca să fie iertat.
Atunci am simțit că sunt creștin. Eu l-am dezlegat și ca om și ca preot.
Asta e problema suferinței. Asta e mare. Că ai să vezi că e mult mai nenorocit omul care te chinuiește decât tu care ești chinuit.
Nu suntem absolut.
Dar poate că și rugăciunile celor închiși au contribuit ca voi astăzi să fiți copii ai lui Dumnezeu și de aceea nu dați în nume de rău, pentru că spun, dragi mei, la Dumnezeu să vă binecuvânteze pe toți.
Maybe I should be quiet now outside this video.
Maybe I shouldn't have hooked up the internet.
Yeah, I know it's a powerful video, and there are many, many others, but this one is one that's in Romanian, in English too, with the translation. So I wanted to show you this one. Let me make it shorter. Hold on, maybe I should. Allow me to mention Constantino Prishan as well. Constantino Prishan. Oh, now, I could have done it next time. I mentioned before that Father Calcio fell in Pitești, fell in the sense in which he became himself a torturer. And after Pitești, he was transferred to Jilava, where Constantino Prishan was there in the same cell with Constantino Prishan and two other people. Marcel, I forgot. Anyone remembers? Petrișor. Marcel Petrișor, I think, right? He was in prison with Marcel Petrișor, Constantino Prishan, and someone else. It's not mentioned, but there were 4 people in prison in the same cell. And many people say that Constantino Prishan, who also fell in Pitești, in the sense in which he also hit people in Pitești, let me put it this way. But once he came out of it, he never accused anyone, Father Calcio says, for what they did to him. He forgave all, and he was always telling us about forgiveness and love. And he talks about a scene when he entered the cell with Constantino Prishan, Father Calcio, and he says, Constantine began to cough up the fluid in his lung. I was leaning against the door, surprised, because I had never seen anything like that. Father Calcio was a medical student before he went to prison. The man was suffocating, perhaps a whole little flagging, and blood came up, and my stomach became upset. I was ready to vomit. Constantino Prishan noticed this and said to me, "Forgive me, I was so ashamed." And the connection that formed between Constantino Prishan and Father Kachu was very strong. When Constantino Prishan was about to die, was Father Kachu cut his veins. I don't know if you cut his vein, and he wanted to take out the not the blood. Plasma, yes. He wanted to take out some kind of method, I don't remember what he did, to take out the plasma of his blood to feed Constantino Prishan so he can keep him alive. That's the connection that formed. Obviously, what did not happen. He didn't cut his vein to die, to kill himself, to not understand me wrongly, but he cut his vein to take blood so they can feed him because they didn't have any kind of food. And then then he died, and Marcel Petichor, whom I mentioned before, got very sick as well. And what they decided was, in the cell, they decided to give the bread that was given to them to Marcel Petichor so he can survive. And Father, to have some kind of nourishment. And Father Kachu remembers all this, and he says, I had moments when I hated him because I had to give him my bread. That's the kind of famish they experienced. But nevertheless, we decided to do it, so we did it. I will not talk about meditation today. So I wanted to show you Father Braga as well. Who, right now, I mentioned he has bone cancer, and he's very close to his end. But I know Mother Gabriela, who's at the monastery in Michigan. She always writes about him on the website, and he keeps people thank you very much, updated about his situation. And she always says that he's very joyful. And whenever I went there and I saw him coming to church, it's unbelievable. You see a very he's I think 85, an old human being, but a very how should I put it? Frail, very frail human being. But nevertheless, I've never seen any joy like any. I've never seen joy as much as you see in this human being. In his frailty, but nevertheless,
you can see there's pain in his body.
There's
he has bone cancer. You see when he walks, what you hear.
He doesn't
when he
walk
talks,
anymore.
But you can see the joy and happiness and light in his spirit and soul. All at the same time. The contrast is unbelievable.
So I will try to finish because I know it's almost late, right? 7:46. So we talked about beauty and constellations, and I wanted to, and I don't even remember anymore if I said it or not, but I wanted to say that beauty is somehow the call for responsibility, but the call for responsibility in the sense in which I am responsible not only for my beauty, but I am responsible for the beauty in the other human being. I am responsible for the beauty in the one I live with. I'm responsible in the beauty of anyone in which I am in contact with. Because anytime I'm in contact with someone, I form a constellation. And in that sense, a call to be birth givers of beauty, as I want to talk about today, it's a call to renew creation. Father Kachu talks about, in one of the homilies for which he was imprisoned the second time, he says, let us build churches. And he talks about let us build churches in the sense in which let us be birth givers of beauty, because building a church means, for him, I think, a right spirit. To build the right spirit within us is Father Kachu, and you remake him. So him already. So the remaking of the constellation, how is that? Some people would say that it's by praying with the living words that the church gave us. Father Kachu talked about the fact that after Pitești, he could not pray anymore. He could not pray anymore, at the beginning at least, because he did not want to desecrate the words of the prayers who were used by his ancestors. He felt ashamed to use the same words that people before him used because of the things he did in Pitești. And at the beginning he started to pray with his own words, and only later, when he felt that he could return to the constellation, if I were to put it this way, he started to pray again with the prayers of the church. So in that sense, we are somehow we are already given constellations. why am I saying? Because I wanted to say that we do not form constellations because we want to form them. I know we talk a lot about freedom here in this country, and we are independent and we can do whatever we want to do. But the way I found it, at least in the way I understand these people, because I don't want to say that I presented today the suffering in during communist persecution. I presented the way it influenced me or the way I saw it. I may be wrong in whatever I just said, but in the way in which I read them is the fact that they always discover that our constellations are already given to us. It's nothing that we create ourselves. The only thing that we can create in those constellations is to make them beautiful. We are given a country, we are given a family, we are given a country, a church, a nation, and all those things we are somehow saved, if we are saved, within a body. And the body of Christ, if we were to put it this way, the church who is the body of Christ, if I were to put it, or the nation who is also a certain kind of body. Father Braga talks about the fact that if we are going to be ever saved, for example, as Romanians, we are going to be saved as a people, as a nation as well, or Greeks, or Americans, or whatever kind of nation we may still have. And in that sense, we can contribute to beauty, I would say, by acknowledging that the ugliness of the other human being depends on us. And I'm sure you remember the prayer before communion. I believe, O Lord, and I confess that thou art really Christ, of whom I am first. Actually, it isn't you. I am the first one. The first sinner is me. And the way I understand it, it's in this sense. I am the first one because of whom the beauty in the world does not work. If the world is ugly around me, it is me who am responsible for it. So, communism could be understood perhaps as a doctrine that apparently desires union and equality. But this equality is always accomplished if we murder all differences. If you think about this equality, it destroys always the unity in difference that is created in the church. And in that sense, many of the people who suffered in prisons and the legionaries, did I say legionaries? Legionary? Okay? Legionnaires, yes. Many of them talked about the fact that they fight the people who went to prison. Because even there's some historical problem. I don't want to get into the historical problems, but they talked about the fact that they considered their fight against the communist apostasy. Aspasia Oțel Petrescu talks. She says we had to resist to becoming atheists to the communist apostasy, this and nothing more. And she also talks about the fact that you resisted this through prayer and through the word of prayer, and that brings constellation, connection not only to the people around us today, but the people who came before us and the people who actually will come after us, because your children will pray with your words and with the words that you teach them and so on. She says the words are alive and they are cleansed by previous experiences, enriched by previous experiences and meanings. So in that sense, words themselves bring us in constellation over time. I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to talk about this because it's before Nativity. So I thought that, I should say that if we talk about birth givers of beauty, maybe it would be wonderful if we can also pray in some respect with the words that Theotokos, Virgin Mary, said whenever she was given the news. In a certain sense, the horrible news of the fact that she will give birth to a son out of wedlock, if you think about it, and then she may be murdered by stoning, right? That was the law. Am I correct? And the answer is, be done unto me according to thy word. And as the acceptance. And Oops, forgive me. I wanted to show you this. It's a painting of Father Arsenio Boca. It's in Bucharest, Biserica Lefterie, if I'm not mistaken. And the the special thing about it is that Christ is in the prison clothes. If you look at it.
He is in what?
Prison club.
Oh, really?
Christ in Zeghia.
Prison.
Hristos în Zeghia, îi zice la...
Under the.
You see? Like the
Bars.
what is it again? Well, Father Arsenio Boca was also in prison, and he painted it during communism. So he wanted to show that what they did, they put Christ in prison somehow because they put the church in prison. This is Father Arsenio Boca. So I will finish with this. So I would say that forgiveness, in that sense, is a curative process, a healing process, and when some kind of harm takes place, then ugliness is brought into the world. Well, this ugliness is healed by being in healing with the other. And the prayer for forgiveness is perhaps, the answer to someone who is harming would be, I want to be with you in the process of your healing. And I think that all those people, I mean, not all, but the majority of the people who went in those communist prisons talk about the fact that I forgave. We always forgave everything. And the hardest thing to do was to forgive ourselves. So, I want to show you a last picture. This is Father Ciprian.
No, look up in the center of the picture. That's what's important.
Yes. But
when we did the outdoor blessing of the water, and by the third or whatever try it was, we eventually got the cross all the way to where the water was not frozen. This picture was caught, I think, by your cell phone.
Yeah.
Right? Right when the cross was where it is, and it's just beautiful.
But I want to leave it with this, that forgiveness is somehow it's renewal of creation. And renewal of creation precisely because you renew the beauty of the constellations that were already made for us. And that's the presentation. If you want to talk about this, I'm sorry if I show you anything that was sad or not sad, but I in all honesty, I told you, for me it's very important to talk about those things, even if I'm making mistakes about them.